Good morning. The Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety is called to order. As you well know, we have been taking testimony on the House Bills 4980 through 4985, as well as House Bill 5120. Today, we have a lot of individuals that would like to speak. Mr. Norquist, Ms. Boyer, you're up.
Okay. Hi, Grover Norquist. I run Americans for Tax Reform. We're a group that focus on keeping government less expensive, less intrusive, less destructive than it would otherwise be, and been active in criminal justice reform for about 20 years when there were a small group of conservatives who realized that we were often focusing on what government shouldn't do and saying, let's not do that. And we were not spending enough time focused on the things the government should do, but get them to do them more effectively and with less damage around them. And criminal justice reform, the prisons, the court system is one of those that frankly conservatives assumed other people were taking care of, that everything was being run okay. And we're realizing that there are both financial costs to the way we have over-criminalized the system, too many laws about too many things, and the length of time that we've put some people in prison, and then how do we treat people when they get out of prison. We've really missed opportunities to do better. This is an important part of what the government should do. It's not on the list of things like national arts groups that shouldn't exist at all. The government ought not to do them. This is in the Constitution. This is a proper role of government. And the reforms that you're looking at today in Michigan are ones similar to ones that passed in Utah and Pennsylvania, looking at expungement, where at some point you say somebody committed a crime, they did something wrong, nobody's arguing that didn't happen, but at what point, after how many years of keeping a clean life in terms of staying away from more crime, do you allow that person to take that off their resume and allow people to make it easier to get work? And I guess one of the costs of incarceration is not just the cost of putting someone in prison, but the cost to their family of not having dad around and the cost of not having that person working. And it's the best way to get people not committing crimes or other challenges is to have jobs more available. I'm not talking about giving people jobs. I'm not talking about throwing money at somebody and having a make-believe job. These are jobs that really exist in the real world, but because they've got on their record that they were a felon or had criminal behavior years in the past, they don't get anywhere near the front of the list in terms of getting work. And so I'm supportive of each of these pieces of legislation that are before you, I think six pieces of legislation. I've worked with people in Utah with their legislation that has worked well on expungement, saying that at some point you can take off people's records, things that have happened in their past, as long as they've not continued to behave in the same way. I think this is a very important way of getting people not to go back to crime, making it easier to get jobs. This is along the lines of what about 8 states have passed now that allow you to keep your driver's license even if you owe fines and fees. If somebody owes fines and fees in California back 5-7 years ago, 14 to 17% of the people in California couldn't drive a car because their driver's license was taken away because they owe the government money. Well, if you can't drive a car, how do you get to work? And if you've got a criminal record on you that years ago, it makes it tougher to go to work. It makes it tougher to re-enter society. I really think that this is a good step forward in helping people get their act together, in helping people get to work, and helping people support a family and get, and that this has been moving in other states. Florida, Michigan is not jumping off into the water all by itself, and a very helpful way of making it easier for people to get to work and keep their own lives in order. And so I've submitted written testimony, but that's a summary of my arguments. And you've seen some studies which suggest that this process increases the likelihood that somebody can get a job, keep a job, and stay out of prison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norquist. Next, we're going to hear from Diana Prichard from Americans for Prosperity. Diana, welcome to committee. Please, when you're ready, push the little button that's next to the microphone, and you're mic'd up, ready to go then. Thank you, Diana, for joining committee.
Thank you, Chairman Lucido. Last August, I joined Americans for Prosperity Michigan as the chapter's Community Engagement Director. Over the past 10 months, I have traveled the state speaking with individuals, business owners, and organizations from Sault Ste. Marie to Kalamazoo to Grosse Pointe. I had dinner with Travis, whose criminal record has disrupted his life to such an extent that it has prevented him from being the father he wants to be to his children, even though his crime had nothing to do with kids. I sat down with Jeff, who believes everyone deserves a second chance and wants to be the change he wishes to see in the world, but is worried that if he knowingly hires someone with a criminal record, he'll be at risk of litigation for his small business from other employees. I've heard from Marge, who wanted to move back to Michigan, her home where she was born and raised, to help us work towards a freer and more prosperous state, but she has struggled to get housing for her family here. All as a result of a decades-old infraction that does not pose a threat to public safety. And these are just a few of the stories. There are countless others, each one from a real person who has found themselves among the more than 93% of people who cannot access an expungement, even though they're eligible for one, simply because our system is too difficult and expensive to navigate. I've met them in my community and in yours. There are neighbors, fellow parents at our kids' schools, and Christians in the next pew when you go to church on Sunday morning. Recently, I and many of AFP's activist volunteers around the state have appreciated the leadership each of you have shown on this committee. We've watched you question the role that government should play in people's day-to-day lives, their ability to earn a living, and their right to run a business in our great state. And then again last week, we watched as you came together here in this committee and then on the Senate floor to reaffirm the role that government has in people's lives and their responsibility to make sure every interaction is not unnecessarily harmful to the people. Senators, the package of bills before you today represent another opportunity for you to leave Michigan and the nation. This legislation will break down barriers for individuals and give Michigan's business owners, many of whom have been hard hit over the next few months, access to an untapped pool of talented, worthy, and loyal employees. Throughout my travel and discussions on this topic, I've often heard Clean Slate referred to as a lifeline, but I don't see it that way. I think we have a duty. Whenever and wherever we see that government's role has outgrown its proper role in our lives because of our systems, we have to correct course. Clean Slate is an overdue correction in the way we handle mistakes and second chances in the state. We can protect public safety without trampling on human dignity and constitutional rights. We can insist that our government get out of the way so people find meaningful work, run businesses that make our communities more prosperous, and pursue happiness with their families. On behalf of AFP Michigan's volunteer activists across the state, I encourage you to vote yes on Clean Slate legislation here and on the Senate floor.
Thank you, Ms. Prichard. You know what? You still had 18 seconds left. That's wonderful. We have a question from Senator Barrett for Ms. Prichard. Go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate the meeting we had. I think going back a few months ago now. One of the comments you made is that expungement is too expensive or too difficult and expensive to navigate in Michigan. I guess I'm asking, if that is the issue we're trying to solve, why don't we make it easier to navigate and less expensive instead of making it entirely automatic? So that, for example, people perhaps who should not have their record expunged would not have it automatically take place. I'm thinking specifically perhaps of people who owe a significant amount of restitution to a victim that they may have extorted in some fashion or another. I guess I'm kind of trying to come to a resolution in my own mind as to how it's a conservative value to say we're not going to place that responsibility on the offender and elevate them over the victim who has still not been made whole. And I already understand that this does not expunge the restitution that is required, but I do think it is a significant way of reducing an incentive people would have to compensate the victim that they owe compensation to justly. This isn't in dispute as to whether or not they owe it.
Yeah, I think I have two answers to your question. One is that in addition to the people who have been impacted by not being able to access an expungement, I've also talked to a lot of victims. I talked to people of victims from anything from petty crime to murder of one of their family members. And what I continue to hear from victims is that monetary restitution is a very low priority for them. What they want to know is that the government, the state, law enforcement cares about their situation and is pursuing it. I completely acknowledge our conversation in your office and with other senators as well who have concerns about our restitution system. I think AFP shares some of those concerns, and that's why we're also committed to addressing that.
Is it a part of this package, though?
It's not. This bill does not take effect for 2 years. It also includes a clause that if we're not ready to put it into effect because of technical difficulties, it can be extended again for 180 days and another 180 days after that, which would take us out to the 3-year mark. I would propose that with your respect in the Senate, our commitment as organizations, and many of whom are on Zoom and in this room with us today as well, if we cannot fix our restitution system in 3 years together, knowing, as you know, I've had conversations with stakeholders, I'm sure you have as well, there is broad bipartisan support for this, as well as fixing restitution. I don't think we should hold up removing barriers and controlling the role of government in people's lives for that issue.
So you would support making restitution or the expungement contingent on a restitution system, so we could put that into the statute to say this doesn't take effect until the legislature acts to create a restitution
I'm going to try to interject something here.
Yes.
For the lawyers that are in the room here today, the court has jurisdiction on these individuals that have taken people's money, and the restitution is all byproduct of the statute. Let's say it's a 5-year felony. After 5 years, the court loses jurisdiction anyways. They can't hold somebody hostage to pay restitution. So if you want to do that dichotomy, it's this. That 5 years is what the court has jurisdiction. They cannot extend probation beyond the 5 years. They've lost jurisdiction. It's unconstitutional. If anybody wants to, submit some testimony that says I'm wrong, but I've wrestled with what Senator Barrett has said, the same thing. I've wrestled with members about that issue. I want to try to nip it in the bud, and it's this. If our court systems are supposed to do what's fair and just, then they are taking the role as the individual that does the balancing act that says the people have a right to have protection, the system has a right to ensure that the restitution is made and make the person whole. After 5 years is the problem that I see that can't be fixed with us.
Right, and Mr. Chair, the only response I would give to that is we are asking the court to then go after the fact, after that 5 years and beyond such time that the statute or the bill would allow to expunge that record. So I would absolutely agree with you that the court's jurisdiction ends at the time of that probation ending. However, if we are then being asked to grant an expungement or a set-aside to someone's record in return for that, I think it's a reasonable demand to say that they should have made at least a good faith effort to recompensate that victim.
So who's the judge of the good faith effort?
And I think we can have that debate as to what that looks like.
Okay,
But
and then
there is
one more
nothing in
thing.
this. I would just say that there's nothing in this package that requires even $1 worth of compensation to the victim.
So,
restitution is.
As a former probation officer and parole officer, I took the liberty of saying, if you want an early release from probation, if that's what you really want, I'll give it to you so long as 1, restitution is paid in full, 2, that you report each and every month, 3, that you do your programs, 4, that you do not violate any of the rules and conditions outlined with the probation order. At the end of the day, the best they've got is a civil judgment, because the court lost its opportunity. And I fault the probation department if they didn't bring them back for court for a show cause, why they should not be held in contempt of court for failure to abide by the terms and conditions of their probation, which was to pay restitution.
I think we should not lose sight of the fact that the grand majority of restitution cases in the state of Michigan are closed, meaning that they are paid. in that it represents a small fraction, however, of the amount of restitution assigned in the state of Michigan, which should lead us to believe that the problem cases are the very large ones. I know when I spoke with you in your office, Senator Barrett, that you were concerned about grandmas. The grandmas who
That was
have
just the example I used. I'm concerned about all victims.
I was concerned with grandpas too.
The small amounts of restitution to individuals are by and large being paid. To answer your previous question to me, no, I don't think that we should hold up this legislation which removes barriers and reaffirms the proper role of
But
government
you're asking me to vote for something on the belief that you will apply the full pressure of your organization and all the assembled organizations here to come to the table and push for a restitution system to be implemented and addressed and corrected and changed in response for me to vote for something today to do this, to do this expungement. What is my assurance that we will have a restitution system in place by the effective date of this legislation, by the time this system goes into effect? And you're asking me to vote for that today, but you will not say that you are willing to commit to it, to put it into the statute now, that would not take effect until restitution system is online. Now, wouldn't it make more sense if you are truly committed to it to say, yes, we are so committed to this that we are willing to put a clause in the bill that says this cannot take effect until the restitution system is in place, if you are committed like you say you are?
And our current system is asking you to have faith in local courts because we have no centralized restitution system. So I'm really asking you is to have the same faith in me and your fellow colleagues as you currently have in others within our system.
One thing, Senator, one thing I think we should realize is how many of these cases actually deal with restitution. I'd like to get at least a handle on that so that our debate is meaningful, which means, is it 10% of the overall expungements that are going to occur? If it is 10%, what is the dollar amount associated with it? And lastly, this, every 6 years I have to go back to court to file, or every 10 years I got to go back to court anyways, to file a motion to renew a judgment under the statute. I knew the best I could get when these cases were prosecuted and the probation had run out, the 5-year statute. My only alternative, that's what I look for up here in this legislature, was to have an order of judgment that I could get my teeth into to bring the individual before the court. And you're right, Tom. You are absolutely right. It makes no sense rewarding somebody who didn't pay back that which is the debt. I get it.
Or if they're not making progress toward it.
But to put a system into place, I'd like to see what that looks like, where a judge has authority to put him in jail, debtor's prison they called it, for not doing what they were supposed to do. If they don't show a good faith effort in going out and getting employment, you know what their excuse is right now? I have a record. No one's hiring me.
Mm-hmm. And without a job, it's very hard to pay restitution. I'll reach out to both of your offices. I look forward to working on this issue.
Okay.
We got to move along. Senator Chang has a question, and we're going to try to make it brief because all these people came to talk.
Well, I think she just sort of addressed it. I was going to ask, in terms of the question, I'm not sure if she's listening, but I was going to ask actually if she had any specific thoughts about, again, how Clean Slate legislation would actually then help people to get a job to then actually pay restitution, and if there was any types of information or data that you might be able to share in that regard about how much more restitution we might actually be able to collect with this legislation.
Thank you, Senator Chang. Interesting dialogue and topic. Senator Russ, did you have a question?
I did, and probably any of the individuals who come to address the overall expungement bill can, address this one, particularly where it's going to be an automatic expungement. There's really, we're being asked with the restitution to have a lot of faith. We're also being asked with the way the tracking is done to have a lot of faith. Under this provision, there's no human oversight for much of what we're expunging. Under a petition, the prosecutor and court are able to review a case to ensure an individual is qualified to receive an expungement. This system will do its own work electronically without oversight. We've already seen what happened with the unemployment insurance system that we had some faith in that it deserved no faith. The system fails to if the system fails to work properly, the state is going to be on the litigation end of these. It also doesn't account for individuals living on a border who commit maybe multiple felonies in a border state. The system is not even going to have any idea of that. All of these different counties and local courts have different tracking systems, different software, to the point where they said they won't even be able to know if you have an under 93-day misdemeanor. The system's not even going to know about that. So we're relying with faith on a system electronically that has failed us with the unemployment system. And here, if it fails us, it could mean a terrible outcome for the citizens of the state of Michigan. So there's many concerns I have about what the plan is to do this automatically.
Good. Thank you, Senator Runstead. I know that I've had discussions with DTMB about your concerns about our computer system. I've had it also with state police if they're here. I've had the same concerns. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, there's only 83 counties. And I understand that right now our record keeping, the way they do things in lean, they're going to rely upon what they say is algorithms within the lean system that will pull up these individuals. It won't get them all, but there also is a, for state immunity, if you will. We would never pass a bill that's going to put the state at risk. So to your point, and I want to make sure everybody's aware of that, if the state's done its best efforts in trying to do the algorithms through DTMB until there's a perfect system, the state has no culpability nor liability if they've done everything they had to do to try to make the record go away. Somebody then comes in and tells the police department, I'd like to tell you that it didn't work for me. They can then get at least the opportunity of taking it away then. So, I mean, it's even happened in my cases where we've had expungements by way of petition to the court. Your Honor, I have notified the FBI, the state police, the local sheriff, the county in which the city municipality, and I've done it to the prosecutor, which is this court. Now, if they didn't do the record the proper way and my client still has it on his or her record, there's no liability the state has. It's governmental immunity, they call it under the law. I just have to go tell them, look, you didn't do the job you're supposed to. Please do your job.
Well, even if we do solve the state liability, you still have a lot of situations where there could be victims at the other end of a failed system.
I agree that the system isn't perfect. Neither is the justice system when somebody is charged wrongfully, in prison wrongfully, and gets out and then collects money from the state. But we're trying to deal with the best we can. And I think the whole purpose of the package, and I know Representative LeGrand is here, thank you for joining us, is to go ahead and make people that have these records employable again. Make them, I mean, look, I've seen it. I just had a call from a client, and I'm sorry I'm going to be winded about this, but I'm pretty damn passionate about what the hell's going on in here. He said to me, you know, Pete, 20 years ago, I had this problem, and you did what you did. And now it's 18 years later, he's 38 years old. And I said, what do you need? He says, I'd like to get this off my record. I've been a good citizen. I've been a good person. It was 2 felonies. And it rose out of the same incident and transaction. Statute wouldn't allow it. And they would not plead it any other way. They said, you take them both and we'll talk about his time. At the end of the day, this man owns a huge company, employs 180 people, married with 3 children, and he's asking me to do something. He said, the system's almost there. We're almost about to have this happen. Because I don't think he's going back to a life of crime. There's statistical data, and everybody that's on the Zoom and in this arena here, after 40 years old, these guys aren't headbanging no more. They're not committing crimes.
I would agree with you. I've known individuals in almost the exact circumstance that you just outlined, very successful, wonderful citizens, committed a crime in their youth. Certainly that needs to be expunged. There's so much that's good in here. There's a lot of this bill package I like, but the ones I have an issue with, I guess I'm going to have to take up with the
Nothing's
sponsors.
perfect. To Senator Barrett's point about restitution, that delicate balance about making somebody whole and cleaning up a record, all these things are possibilities. Let's make them a reality. Let's make them a reality. So let's see if we can all work together and get it done. John Cooper from Safe and Just Michigan. Welcome to committee. You're on.
Good morning, committee members. My name is John Cooper. I'm the Executive Director of Safe and Just Michigan. We're a nonpartisan criminal justice policy and research organization based in Lansing. Safe and Just Michigan supports all the expungement reform bills being considered today, but my testimony will focus on the automatic expungement or Clean Slate bill. We've heard a lot of testimony about why this is a good idea, and I want to respond directly to some of the concerns that have been raised. With respect to the petition process itself, the fundamental problem is scalability. We get about 3,000 expungements a year in Michigan. As you've heard, the uptake rate on the petition process is very low. And part of the problem that's inherent in the petition process is it's a paper-based, time-intensive process that requires a lot of system actors. So courts, prosecutors' offices, et cetera. If they have to put eyeballs on every file and go through it in detail, you're going to be asking a lot of the system. It's going to be extremely expensive to operate, and it's not going to result in a lot of record clearance. So what the automatic expungement is attempting to do is solve that problem in a low-cost, scalable way. So instead of 3,000, you could have 100,000. And the goal is to target eligibility on low-level, nonviolent, old convictions. And these are the ones where we have the most confidence that the person's not going to reoffend. The research on this is extremely clear. The article that Prescott and Starr wrote says that a person who has received a record clearance in Michigan is less likely than a member of the general public to commit a crime. And this makes sense. We're talking about people who have stopped getting in trouble, they've put their lives together, and the ceiling on their opportunity is limited by their prior criminal history, even though statistically they're unlikely to reoffend. With respect to the restitution issue, I mean, it's worth having a conversation about restitution policy, but I don't think that this package is the right place to do that. And we oppose addition of a requirement that restitution be fully paid. And there are several reasons for this. First of all, if we want restitution repayment rates to improve, the best way to do that is to help get people jobs so they can afford to pay their restitution. 80% of criminal defendants are indigent when they go into the system. And the problem we're trying to solve here is that people can't get jobs because they have criminal records. And if we say that you can't get your record sealed because you haven't paid your restitution, that's kind of a catch-22 for people. And I don't think it's good policy. Second,
Sorry, John, our time
this
is.
requirement would
Excuse me, John, can you hear
the
me?
impact of the bill.
Can you hear me? John, can you hear me?
Because there's
is
hundreds
a
of
perfect
thousands of
system, I can
eligible
tell.
people, even a small percentage carve out would mean thousands of people do not get the opportunity for a second chance. Yes.
Okay, we have time limits because we have so many people that are going ahead and talking.
I can't hear. I don't know if it's a microphone thing or what.
We have time limits. Can you hear me
Yeah.
now, John? We have some
Yes, I
time
can.
limits and
Very good.
constraints. Because we
How
have
much time do I
so
have
many
left?
people willing to talk today, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance. So can you recap? I mean, can you just conclude now what it is you're trying to tell us?
Sure. Adding a fully paid restitution requirement would undermine the core purpose of the bill. It would not improve repayment rates for victims, and it would hurt public safety. And that's because helping people get jobs is good for public safety.
Thank you.
There's also an implementation concern. It's a data question instead of systems question. The restitution, all the court debt and fines and fees is lumped in with restitution, as I understand it, in the system. And building a automatic system that could disaggregate restitution data would be a challenge.
John,
And
I have a
think
question
there's other-
for you. Don't want to cut you short, but do you have any data that supports, that can tell us how many people in the system currently in Michigan have restitution issues versus non-restitution issues?
That's the core of the problem, Senator, is that we don't have that data.
Okay.
There's no state level restitution data kept. It's not aggregated at the state level. It's housed in individual case files in local courts.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your testimony today. Members, any questions of John? Thank you, John, for your testimony. Have a good day. Yes, Jennifer Cabinda, MSU School of Criminal Justice. Thank you for being with us, Jennifer. We appreciate your being with us today, and if you go ahead and push the little button that's next to the microphone, you'll be able to be heard much better.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that okay? Thank you. I'm an associate professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, and I join you to express the reasons the Clean Slate bill should be passed. When people with criminal records attempt to re-enter society and become productive, law-abiding citizens, they are faced with debilitating roadblocks in almost every important area of life. From being banned from public housing, to losing the ability to find employment, to being denied financial aid in order to access higher education, justice-involved people face a life of punishment even after they've served their sentence. This in turn affects families, which in turn affects communities. The Clean Slate bill, which would grant automatic expungements to former offenders after a period of crime-free behavior, would serve to give people a second chance. The Clean Slate bill will make it easier for those who've served their time in prison, jail, or probation to secure housing. Finding housing is one of the primary challenges that returning prisoners face upon their release, as it impacts their ability to successfully transition back into the free world. Having a record can make it difficult to find housing, since leasing companies, private landlords, and public housing, they often screen individuals with records, and they're reluctant to rent to them, which then further depletes their housing options. Some estimates indicate that up to 1/4 of formerly incarcerated people end up homeless. In addition, a criminal record blocks many employment opportunities and precludes employment in certain occupations, even when there's no clear or empirically based rationale that exists for imposing that barrier. Criminological theories of crime, they underscore the importance of work as a setting for social integration. Individuals with a history of joblessness are at a high risk for criminal involvement, but locating stable, high-quality work can provide an important pathway out of crime. However, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, 27% of people returning home from prison, they are unemployed, which is 5 times the unemployment rate of the general population. Approximately 90% of employers conduct background checks, which precludes those with criminal records from often securing employment. However, applicants with clean records receive 63% more callbacks than those who possess a criminal record. Most individuals who are released from prison to the community, they face a host of challenges upon release. As a result, most rely heavily upon their family members and social support networks to assist them in tackling these obstacles when they return home from prison. The family unit is often affected and at times strained because many family members, they struggle with their own limited incomes. And so in conclusion, automatic expungements would increase the likelihood that formerly incarcerated individuals secure employment, they secure housing, obtain stable employment, and provide for their families. When reintegration is made challenging for people with a conviction, it increases the odds that they will return to crime. Even though it sounds counterintuitive, clearing records can help reduce recidivism in the long run, which in turn promotes public safety. Justice-involved individuals should not be bound by their past, especially after they've demonstrated years of crime-free behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. Good timing, too. I agree with you. I've seen too many prisoners get out of jail, and it's like a bird that you clipped its wings. Fly.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fly, too. I got nowhere to stay, no family member wants me, and I got no job.
Yeah.
And you're shaking your head again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So wouldn't it be nice when the jail program gets rolling through the legislature that we have something to talk about, which is a reintegration. Reintegration means from the day that they go in, that there's a protocol that's going to get followed so that the pathway out is a lot smoother to lead to success and not recidivism. Professor, we're in the same book, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would like to also say, I know people often sometimes are concerned about how past behavior shapes future behavior.
Past performance is the best predictor of future performance.
Absolutely, and that is true. We know that to be true, for example, in the field of education. Entrance to college depends on past academic performance in high school, as well as standardized tests. We know in personal finance matters, creditors rely on individuals' past reliability in paying bills on time and meeting financial obligations to assign a credit score. And even when applying for auto insurance, one is often asked a question, have you had traffic violations in the past 3 years? And that will certainly impact one's insurance premiums. However, I will say that credit scoring companies, insurance companies, they explicitly restrict the time period for which prior behavior is considered relevant. For example, credit scores typically look back 7 years, and insurance records often limit their inquiry to 3 years. And so the Clean Slate bill is not automatically expunging records right away, but it's expunging records for those who've actually shown themselves to live a crime-free life for several years.
Thank you for giving us that data also about the callback rate with a criminal record. That's very helpful for me, because I too, as an employer, would like to see what that means in the long run. If I didn't see somebody with a blemish on their record, would I have more? I think all of us would on this committee. More initiative to call that individual versus one that has a record,
Yes.
even if it's 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Chairman.
Go ahead. You can go ahead and please present your testimony.
Great, thank you. I'll start out in advance that the audio on my end is a little hard, so if I have to ask you to repeat any questions, I'm going to apologize right now. My name is David Safavian. I'm the General Counsel for the American Conservative Union. I'm also a native Michigander, having split my time between downriver Detroit and Benzie County in Senator Vanderwalt's district. I've submitted written testimony outlining why ACU is so strongly supportive of Clean Slate, and also a refutation of the arguments I've heard in meetings with a few of your colleagues. I want to respect your time. I'm not going to read to you, but this morning I wanted to put Clean Slate in a little bit of a different context. In particular, given the events of the past 2 weeks, Clean Slate's not directly related to the George Floyd tragedy. I think, we all know this proposal was introduced long before, but the challenges facing many who have taken the streets can be linked to economic opportunity, and that's where Clean Slate, we believe, can be a strong solution. I am not one to make excuses for misbehavior, my own or anyone else's. That's why God gave us free will, and we're all to be judged on it. But it's hard not to feel a measure of sympathy for people who, because of their records, are systematically foreclosed from jobs, housing, educational opportunities, pick and choose. There are 44,000 regulations governing ex-offenders that don't have an expungement. So it's no wonder that there's a segment of people marching in the streets about economic opportunity. And I'll tell you, in our criminal justice work, we often hear that pithy and superficial line, you do the crime, you do the time, and they use it as an excuse not to fix the system. And so as I was praying and thinking last night, that line just kind of reverberated in my head. You do the time, you do the crime, or vice versa. The question we all need to ask is how much time is enough? How long should the after effects of a mistake continue to create economic harm for an individual and his or her family? For low-level crimes, such as those in HB 4980, I can't imagine anybody in their right mind says the answer is forever. But that's the case unless somebody gets an expungement. Now, I think it's fair to say it's in everybody's interest to vest people with economic opportunity. It's in the state's interest, it's in our community's interest, it's in the legal system's interest, and it's in the ex-offender's interest. And so our public policy from our perspective at ACU needs to be that we need to facilitate the process of economic empowerment and opportunity to the great extent possible. And that's where Clean Slate comes in. Offering a clean slate is a massive step forward to the people who have been sent to prison. Mr. Chairman, I want to leave you with a very quick story. I want to be respectful of your time. But last
You got about
year,
15 seconds to go.
my colleague, Reiser, and I got to tour a maximum security prison in Norway to deal with to look at how that country deals with their criminals, right? And so I asked the warden a question. I said, Warden, what kind of restrictions are put on people after they get out?
Going to have to conclude.
And he scratched his head and he said, well, you know, here in Norway, we believe freedom is the most important thing we can take away from somebody. So if we continue to penalize them after we've taken away their freedom, what does it say about how we value liberty? It kind of had me crying at the time because it really reminded me that maybe we don't value liberty enough. And indeed, it says more about us since we put these lifetime obstacles in front of our fellow citizens long after they've paid their debt to society.
Thank you, David. Members, because of time limitations and then we're going to be going to session, we're going to read in some cards right now. Madam Clerk, please read in those cards that were presented.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. In support of all of the bills in the package, 4980 through 4985 and 5120, Algeria Wilson, representing National Association of Social Workers. Again, in support of all of the bills, Tim Soughton, Business Leaders for Michigan. Again, in support of all of the bills, Peter Rook, representing Michigan League for Public Policy. In support of 4981 through 4985 and 5120, but opposed to 4980, Jess Averill Hammond, representing Michigan Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention and Treatment Board. In support of Bill 4980, Marcia Hune, Community Bankers of Michigan. That is all of the testimony cards.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Priscilla, good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Go right ahead. Thank you for joining us in committee.
Thank you. I just want you to know I spent a lot of time writing this, and for the sake of time, I'll just read it. My name is Priscilla Bordeo, and I want to thank the members of the committee for allowing me to testify today. I'm here because I am a crime survivor, an advocate, and I care about the safety of my community. I'm a victim of child sexual abuse. At the age of 12, I was molested by 2 family members. By the age of 13, I was questioning if I was miscarrying my father's child. My dad was sexually abused by his father, so my dad repeated the cycle. Because of what happened to me as a child, society says that I should be on the streets, serving jail time, or be stuck with identity issues. But I'm not. I'm not broken, and I'm not a statistic. I am the first in my family to graduate from college with a bachelor's degree in education, and now I am a local and national advocate for girls who've been sexually abused. I'm also a motivational speaker, a worship director at a local church, and a soon-to-be author. I lead a group of women called Remarkable for women ages 18 to 35. It's a mentoring and discipleship group where I help them reach their full potential and God-given purpose despite what life has thrown at them. In the past, I have served on the board of the House of Promise right here in Lansing, a house for girls who've been sexually sex trafficked. I am also a member of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice. I chose to rise above what society says I should be. This is because my faith, forgiveness, redemption in my Heavenly Father. And as a crime survivor, what is most important to me is what happened to me does not happen again, to me or to anyone else. This is why policies that are proven to reduce recidivism, like state legislation, is so important. The Clean Slate legislation includes criminal record sealing that could help hundreds and thousands of Michigan residents, with up to decades of law-abiding behavior, reset their records. If we want to make our communities safer, we have to allow people who have made mistakes and pay their debts to earn the opportunities to be stable and to take care of their families. That means removing obstacles to them getting jobs, housing, and other basic things we need to be self-sufficient and move forward in our lives. This is why I support this legislation. I believe hope is a person. His name is Jesus. And senators, you also can be people who instill hope by creating the necessary change that gives Michiganders with past convictions the tools they need to thrive and contribute to their communities. Clean Slate legislation will save taxpayer dollars and help expand states' workforce. This couldn't be more important now that we face an even more severe economic challenge due to the pandemic. We can create positive change for victims and their families by giving us a voice in criminal justice policy. After all, we know most profoundly what happens when our public safety system fails us. As a crime survivor, I believe that there should be accountability when people commit crimes and do harm. I also believe that when people have served their time, we need to do everything we can to reduce the risk that they will reoffend. The automatic expungement in this bill sensibly applies to certain offenses and automates the expungement process after 10 years. Currently, because of the hurdles to accessing expungement, less than 7% of people who qualify will ever receive one. That is unacceptable and it's unnecessary. This committee and the full Senate can help ensure Michigan has a better, more effective policy by passing the Clean Slate package. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Is Arthur Reiser here?
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate you for having me. I'll be really brief. Most of my comments were actually covered by David. We work very closely on these issues. I'm going to add a little meat to those comments he made. Specifically, I think that, as someone who works for a conservative organization, someone who, prides himself on being center right, this is squarely within the realm of what we should be thinking about. Specifically, if you are not for limited government, you're not a conservative. And there's nothing more the government can do to you than hold you underwater indefinitely. And that's kind of what we're seeing here with the way that we treat individuals with criminal history records. It's also really holds back our economy. Each year, $78 billion are lost nationwide due to unemployment that's directly caused because of criminal records. And that translates into tax revenue that is so desperately needed by all states across the country right now. I think I want to be very sensitive of your time. And the one thing that I think I really want to leave this committee with is we cannot disinherit a generation of Michigan citizens from the American dream and then act like we should be better for it. And that is exactly what's going on. I have been a police officer. I have been a prosecutor. I understand some of the sentiments out there by law enforcement, but at the end of the day, our job in law enforcement as cops and prosecutors is to protect, it is to serve, it is to keep the community safe. And there is zero evidence that keeping these individuals underwater actually makes it safer. There's just none of it. Actually, letting people go back to work is one of the best things you can do to ensure they don't commit new crimes. So I am very enthusiastic over these measures. I'm very happy to testify, and I thank the committee for their time.
Thank you very much. Being no further business before the Senate Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, and for those that have submitted the cards, I've talked to you about that as well as your testimony. We stand adjourned.